This is going to be a little story of the Mill and the Tonkin and the Ham families. And this is a disclaimer right now that it's not intended to be anything professional. It's just a fun thing that I want to do for my family. And I am Tom Mill, the oldest of three kids from Ellen and Tom Mill, but we'll tell you all of that as we go along. And now this is the start of our story coming into the Elkhorn Mountains in Montana. It was about this time of year, middle of May in 1984. I'm going to let my wife give you this. Go ahead.
84, the family of Richard Ham and Elizabeth, who were both from Cornwall, traveled from Leadville to Elkhorn, Montana. They probably came up this road in a covered wagon with 6 children. Our grandma, this is Mom's mother. Children were born to Elizabeth and Richard in Elkhorn vicinity. 2 of these children died as toddlers, 3 and 4 years old. Of the 15 children, 5 girls married and lived in Montana, and 6 sons.
We will now shut off until we get a little bit farther up the canyon into the Elkhorn Mountains, and we'll take this up again. I don't know if you can see this or not, but that's snow that it's just finished raining and hailing here. And it's the 16th of May, and they're still having snow, and as we get up closer into Elkhorn, I'm sure we'll see a lot more of it. See you later. As they rode up this canyon into the Elkhorn Mountains, I'm sure there was a lot of wildlife, and things like this moose probably were here to greet them. We're farther up the road now, and we're approaching the Elkhorn Mountains. It's about 21 miles into the valley or into the gulch here, and we're about halfway in, and the mountain peaks are beautiful with the snow. This covered wagon with 6 kids, 2 just a little over a year old, and Grandma Curtis is 2 years old, and the oldest is 12 years old. Mother and father looking to settle down in their new town in Elkhorn. We'll be there pretty soon. Richard's first view of Elkhorn. That was going to be his home for many years, and he would end up dying here and being buried in the graveyard in Elkhorn that we'll see in a little while. I'm sure when they drove up this road in 1864, this was a bustling town. There must have been a lot of ore trucks coming in and out, a lot of buggies and horses coming in and out. This mill was active and pumping out a lot of ore. Richard was cousin Jack from Cornwall, England, a hard rock miner from St. Austell. He and his wife were from St. Austell and first settled in Michigan and then went on to Leadville, and now with 6 children, they're approaching the last phase of their life here in Elkhorn. We'll get a little closer. Now we are entering into the town, and you should know why these Cornish miners are called Cousin Jacks. They were recognized all over the world for their deep shaft hard rock mining expertise, and wherever they would be mining, these Cornish miners would be doing the best job. And the owners of the mines would always say, well, do you have a relative? And of course the Cornishman would say, yeah, my cousin Jack is a good miner. And he said, well, bring him over and I'll hire him. So the nickname became their nickname that carried on, and a Cornishman is called a cousin Jack, and his wife is always called a cousin Ginny. This now is the town, and a little community, and you can't call it a community, a little place up the gulch called Dago Town will be where Grandma and her family lived, and 11 of the 15 kids grew to be adults and married and moved away.
Here's some of the buildings in Elkhorn that are still standing or trying to stand. Here's a location of some of the old schoolhouses. They went to school from the age of 6 to the age of 12.
If it wasn't.
This had to be one of the social main highlights or hot spots in town, called Fraternity Hall. It had many shows, it's a dance hall, and of course different lodges met here. You can still barely read Fraternity Hall up on the top. It's well weathered, and the poor thing is not going to have many more years, I'm afraid. Grandma told us of many fun parties they went to in this building. Let's go in and see. Now this is where Grandma had her first job. She was 12 years old, and she worked in this hotel, and I guess changing beds and doing whatever she had to do. Remnants of the old ore dumps. This was apparently their main street, and as you see by the signs there were shops one after the other. The barber shop down there has a sign reading the only place you could get a bath in Elkhorn from 1880 to 1890, for 10 years, the only place you could get a bath. This is the doctor's office, and Grandma, when she was 15 years old, was keeping house and cooking for 4 bachelors, and one of them was this doctor. And there's his fancy doctor's office right next to the saloon. Probably got a lot of business right next door. Up on the hillside you can see the old mill. I think that's what it was. They did have a smelter here too, but I think this was the main mill that milled the ore down into sizes that it could be smelt, sent to the smelter. This looks like it may be a little more high-class doctor's office, and as the sign says, it was the first one. So more than likely this is the doctor that Grandma worked for. And whether she worked for these 4 guys in their homes and did the house cleaning and they each had their own homes, or they lived together, we don't really know for sure. Now this could very well be the first house that Richard settled down with his family of 6 kids and Elizabeth in Elkhorn. After a few years here, Elizabeth had Richard add on a room, and they took in the young miners from Cornwall and had a boarding house. This, the old boarding house. We've got a sign on it that tells us that it was the old boarding house, and the chances are very good this was the one that we've been told about, like Grandma Curtis. And right up the hill from here is where the old White House was. It was called the White House because it was big and white, and the mine superintendent lived in it. We'll get another shot from another angle, but that's the big White House. It was the biggest, fanciest house, and the mine superintendent lived there. Now we can get a little better view of the White House. It looks like it's still in good shape. And this is the backside of the old boarding house that could have been where the Ham family lived. When we came back here for a reunion and Grandma Curtis was 101 years old, we were looking at all these old houses and asking her which house was her family picture taken, the one we have in our album with all the kids on the front porch. And she says, "Oh, that's not here in Elkhorn. That's up in Dago Town." And we said, "Well, where's Dago Town?" And she said, "Well, that's just up the gulch up here. It's up this direction, and it's where all the Italians lived. So let's go up and see if we can find it." Now we're up in what Grandma called Dago Town, where all the Italians lived. And it's about 2 miles or so up the gulch from Elkhorn. And where they lived was right here. This is the house that the family picture is taken in front of. We're shooting at it from a different angle because of the sun, and there's no porch anymore, but when we took this picture and brought it home for Grandma when she was alive and we talked about it, she asked about the root cellar in the back, and of course it has one, and we've been in there and looked at it, and the upstairs stairs where they were, and the side room, all these things match perfectly. We're sure this is the house. And they lived here until Grandma was about 12 years old, and they moved back into town. We'll get a little closer. And coming up here a little bit closer, let's see if we can zero in on this enlargement of the picture that we're talking about. And there's the family sitting on the porch in front of this old house. That is really neat for us to be able to be here and see this. If this thing will shoot inside. We're in what would be the living room, and this is where the stove was. You can see where the chimney went through. In the back, that's the door into the root cellar. And there's the bottom of the stairway going upstairs. There's a stair above us. And this is the stairway upstairs. It's about almost an 8-foot clear ceiling, I guess, 7'6". And the second floor is not really safe enough to walk on. As you can see, there's some pretty good holes through it. And let's see if we can see this root cellar. Grandma told me about her dad building this root cellar and digging it into the side of the mountain. You can see the mountain is right back here. He dug it into the side of the mountain, and it was several steps down. This is the doorway, and it was several steps down into the root cellar. And it had big logs holding up the roof and a sod roof. And they could store things here all winter, of course. It was all enclosed. It wasn't, of course, open like it is now. But that was pretty neat. And then off to this side is room that they added on. And I don't know what was out there, but that all fits with Grandma's description. It's wonderful. Right behind the house we've just come out of is this mine shaft. Collapsed now, but it's just on the other side of these trees. By the way, the mountain now is reforested with all the trees. During the busiest time of Elkhorn, many of these trees were gone to be burned for fuel in the smelter and used down the mine. This is May the 16th, and you can see the patches of snow. They're all around here in Dagotown and Elkhorn. And of course the mountain peaks, as you can see, are really loaded. And that highest peak is named Elkhorn, appropriately. It's really a nice day today. We're very lucky. This is just another view from across town of Dagotown at Grandma's house. I'm sure this was a bustling community, and the street must have been somewhere in between their house and this row of houses in front of us. And I'm shooting this across a nice little snowfield. What a peaceful, beautiful area.
Becky found an antique. Throw it out.
Becky found an antique plastic cup. That's not.
No, it's not plastic.
It's not plastic. It's got to be antique.
It's the never full cup.
Never full.
It's never full cup. It's got a hole in the bottom. Now, after leaving Dagotown and coming back into Elkhorn, and probably that's when they moved into this house where they took in boarders. And Grandma's 12 when they moved in, but as she grew up, when she was 17, she met Stephen Tonkin, who was one of the boarders, and soon after that they were married. And now let's see what's up in the graveyard. After about a mile's drive up the mountain and very narrow, muddy, bumpy road with some snow, we arrive at the cemetery. And when Grandma was 101 years old, we brought her here, and she was in a wheelchair at the time, but she was very, very sharp, and I wheeled her up the hill, and with help we passed her over the fence into the cemetery to go see the grave of her father and some brothers and sisters. Let's go up. And here we are at the Ham gravesite in Elkhorn. And originally around this gravesite there were picket fences, or a picket fence that had a round ball on top of the straight picket. And Grandma remembers her dad making that when little Frankie died, and he painted the white picket white and the round ball on top was painted black, and built this little fence around the grave of little Frankie. When we came up with our family maybe 15 years ago, we saw the grave site, and sagebrush was growing all over it, and the picket fence was falling down, and we all cleaned out the sagebrush and we propped up the fence the best we could and made it look pretty nice, and then took another picture and took a big picket back for Grandma and took some pictures back, and of course she was thrilled. When she came back when she was 101, why, the family had taken down the old pickets and built this little chain fence around it and cleaned it up. And of course Grandma was very happy to see it, and it's nice for us to be able to go back to our heritage and see some of our roots. great-grandfather Ham, Richard Ham, is buried here, and two of the kids. Baby Flory was the other baby here, and this side you can see the name quite clearly, Ham, and it's Richard Ham. The graves here, some are still maintained, and it's a beautiful, peaceful spot. Mother's Day just being a few days ago, I think some have been just decorated. While we're here in the graveyard, we may as well notice the grave erected by the EMS Club, whoever that was, to the memory of Peter Wise, W-Y-S, 1824 to 1872. He was the discoverer of the Elkhorn mine. Looks like he died before it really became rich. Now, before leaving Elkhorn, we need to get Grandma married here in the Methodist Church in 1899 to Stephen Tonkin. And we know by the wedding license that it was in the Methodist Church here in Elkhorn. They got the wedding license in Boulder. And soon after they were married, Stephen decided that things were better in Park City, Utah, and other places. The mining here in Elkhorn was starting to dry up. So he and Bertha, or Bertie, as everyone called Grandma, Stephen and Bertie took off for Park City, Utah. And after spending time there and having their first son, Billy, they came back to Boulder, where they settled down, and my mother, Ellen, was born. Now let's go to Boulder and see what we can find there. Goodbye for now, Elkhorn. It's been nice, and we'll be back, and we'll be seeing you again. So long. Well, we're now in Boulder in front of the Methodist Church, where Stephen and Bertie and Billy, who was born in Park City, and then when they moved back, they settled here in Boulder, and this was their church. Before we get into that part of the story, though, when Stephen and Bertie were married in Elkhorn, Bertie's father had been dead for 2 years, and now Elizabeth was left with all the kids. And soon after Bertie left with Stephen, Elizabeth left and went into Butte with all the kids. In the meantime, Susan, or Bertie, and Stephen had gone to Delmar, Idaho first in the mining, and then on to Park City, where Billy was born, and then had moved back here to Boulder to settle down, and that's where Ellen was born and lived through, I'm not sure what grades in grade school before they moved to Butte. I don't know if you can see anything inside the church, but it's a very nice, simple, old church, and still in very good shape. Now there are the Elkhorn Mountains, where the Ham family started, and now we have come to Boulder, and we are in the cemetery in Boulder, And after Stephen and Bertie had started in Elkhorn and then gone to Del Mar, Idaho, and then Park City, and then came here to Boulder. This is where Ellen Mill, my mother, was born, and Paul, my brother, my mom's brother, youngest brother, was born. And his dad, Paul Stephen Tonkin, passed away with the flu in 1919. Soon after that, Bertha, Grandma Curtis, picked up her family and they all moved back into Butte. And we'll see you in Butte. This is a beautiful cemetery. Looking over the valley. Let's go to Butte. And the view of Boulder from here is kind of nice too. The water tower, and there's the courthouse. It's quite a little community still. I imagine 800, maybe 1,000 people maximum live here. Now we are home, and we have a few pictures of Elkhorn the way it was, and we're looking at a picture of the miners in the Elkhorn mine. These are the real cousin Jacks, the muckers at their work. Deep shaft miners. And just quickly, this is another picture of the house that we found and the family in front of the house. And Grandma Curtis is, Bertie as we knew her, was third from the right.
Left.
Third from the left in the picture, third from the left. This is another picture of the graveyard that you saw in Elkhorn, and I described as having a picket fence around it and picket fence falling down, and this is the way we found it about 10 years ago, and family and I propped it up and cleaned it up and made it really look nice for that second picture. And we brought back this picket that you see here. That's one of the pickets that was on around the grave, and you see the round ball on top. It was painted black, and the picket itself was painted white. But obviously after over 100 years, it's or almost 100 years, it's well weathered. Thinking about the dates, it was 1894 that Frankie died, and this picket fence was made, and Grandma remembered her dad making this, so it is 101 years old. Now this is a picture of Grandma Brown Ham Cox. She's a very distinguished lady and all dressed up in her fancy hat. And there's a nice close-up. I remember her very well, and she died when she was 91, and her grave is in Butte. These are some other pictures of Grandma Cox. This is kind of the way I remember her in Butte. She had the thick glasses and seemed like she always wore these aprons. And there she is feeding the chickens. And here she is with the three youngest kids.
7.
So these three, this picture must have been taken when they were in Leadville.
No, Elkhorn.
Well, the three youngest, I'm confused here. The three youngest were clearly born in Elkhorn.
And the little
When they
girl,
came to Elkhorn, of course, they had the seven kids, and Grandma was 2 years old at the time, but these three in the picture are the three youngest born in Elkhorn.
the little girl is buried.
The little girl in the picture here on the lap of Grandma Cox is Flory, and she is buried in Elkhorn with her brother and her dad. Here's a couple of interesting pictures too. This is Grandma Birdie, or of course we call her Grandma Curtis most of the time. A beautiful young lady. And there's Stephen Tonkin, her husband Paul Stephen Tonkin. And of course you've seen his grave, and died of the flu. This is their marriage license. We have a copy, and it's nice to have all these things. As we talked about, after Grandma came to Butte from Boulder after her husband had died, and she went to work in Gamers. These are some pictures of her working in the kitchen in Gamers. And this is a picture of taken in front of Gamers when Grandma was 101 and we went back to visit. And last but far from least, this is Grandma Curtis when she was 100-year-old and her birthday, and one of her grandsons, Al, a photographer, came to Salinas to her party and took her picture. She was a beautiful lady, and we still miss her very much. On her trip to Butte, we took her on the airplane, and you can see her leaning there looking out the window. We were a little concerned about her flying, and she might be fearful, but she wanted to sit next to the window so she could see out the window. She took it very well. We had no problems. That's my mother, Ellen, sitting next to her. So it's been fun doing this. I hope it hasn't bored everybody too much. Bye-bye.